Hello and welcome and a very happy new year. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. People across the world ring in the new year with massive celebrations. World leaders address their nations on the occasion. The United States has carried out strikes against 3 vessels in international waters that were suspected of narco trafficking. According to the US Southern Command, the vessels were traveling as a convoy. US President Donald Trump has announced the withdrawal of National Guard troops from Portland, Chicago, and Los Angeles, hints at stronger comeback in the future. Russian President Vladimir Putin voiced his confidence on victory in Ukraine, while his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky warned that peace cannot come at any cost in their respective New Year's addresses to their countries. Separatists from Yemen's Southern Transitional Council announced an agreement to deploy government forces in areas they have recently seized. Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te vows to defend the democratic island's sovereignty in a New Year's speech after China carried out military drills. Lai said he will steadfastly defend national sovereignty in a televised address from the presidential office. The US government has granted an annual license to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing to import US chip manufacturing equipment with facilities in Nanjing in China, the chipmaker said. Elon Musk's brain implant company Neuralink will start high-volume production of brain-computer interface devices and move to an entirely automated surgical procedure in 2026, Musk said in a post on the social media platform X. And viewers, let's start with a look at the top story. Now, President Donald Trump is saying that his administration is removing National Guard troops from Chicago, Los Angeles, and Portland. The announcement was made in a Truth Social post on Wednesday. Trump said federal forces could return if crime rises in those cities. The deployments began earlier this year amid protests and were justified by the administration as necessary to fight crime and protect federal property. Local leaders and Democrats opposed the move, saying the deployments were unnecessary and an example of federal overreach. Meanwhile, courts repeatedly ruled against the administration and judges said there was no evidence troops were needed to protect federal property. Yesterday, a federal appeals court ordered California National Guard troops returned to Governor Gavin Newsom's control. Last month, the U.S. Supreme Court blocked Trump's attempt to deploy Guard troops in Illinois, saying such authority applies only in exceptional cases. All right, and now joined in by Dr. Asta Chadha. She's an associate professor of international relations at Ritsumeikan University, and she joins us from Kyoto. Thank you very much, Dr. Chadha, for joining me, and I wish you a very happy new year on behalf of NewsX World. Now, this indeed looks like a welcome development from the United States. Why do you think Trump has ordered this now?
Well, very happy new year to the entire NewsX team, and thank you once again for inviting me here. I mean, there were talks going in the US, even in early December, because the troops had started moving out of some of these states and some of the cities already. And the reason was that they were fearing, or I mean, at least the administration was fearing that the kind of outcome that they received from the US Supreme Court, would not allow them to engage these troops and their deployment in the cities, mainly in the name of immigration crisis or violent crime, so on and so forth. And, that's exactly what happened. The courts ruled that, this was too disproportionate and this was not even required as part of the deployment. And lastly, I think the crux of that judgment from the Supreme Court is also the fact that they're expressing their disapproval of the manner in which the National Guard had been deployed under
Right.
direct, powers of the president, and the fact that,
Hmm.
this could have been engaged for longer term beyond December 2. So now, given that this is a setback, given that they do not find enough legal arguments in terms of deployment of national guards for combating illegal immigration, given the fact that they do not find any evidence of the rise or now the proposed or the said fall in violent crimes as President Trump has stated, all of this pretty much shows that this was far from wanting to maintain social order or wanting to decrease crime in the cities, and this was more about President Trump trying to consolidate his power in one way through these national guards.
Dr. Chadha, would you say that this is now going to set a precedent for such orders to be taken place in other cities as well of the US?
I mean, that is what's expected because this withdrawal is
Hmm.
after a significant legal loss, after a significant legal setback for the
Hmm.
Trump administration, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And because he still seems to be claiming that the removal is because crime is lower in the cities,
Hmm.
but he does not seem to be accepting the fact that these troops were never allowed onto the streets in some cities, and that is a fact. If you look at what happened in Chicago, in a lot of those places the local leaders had disputed this deployment, and in a lot of places the guards were not even deployed in the cities. So putting all of those ideas aside, I think President Trump only wants to focus on the fact that he's withdrawing the troops for his own reasons, and the fact
Hmm.
that he maintains that power to withdraw them. He sees it as another way where he could make way for them to come back if he feels that the crime has risen. But if you look at it legally, there is no basis for this deployment, and this will definitely serve as you said, as a precedent for any other leader
Hmm.
wanting to deploy the National Guards in cities on the basis of things that do not require their deployment, because the National Guard deployment requires emergency situations or something which is unprecedented
Hmm.
and needs that sort of security. Things like crime and immigration do not require that kind of deployment. So this will definitely serve as a base sort of foundation of how the presidents or people in power can then mobilize troops.
Now, Dr. Chadha, this is also coming just as Trump had said that he would in fact strengthen National Guard crackdown on immigration ahead of the midterms. But he seems to have taken a U-turn on that stance. What do you think is triggering that change in mindset?
I mean, one is clearly the fact that the Supreme Court, which was at least up until now, since President Trump's administration
Hmm.
has been in power, has been seen as largely conservative.
Hmm.
But, even they have ruled against the administration's use of the National Guard. So that is a major, major factor that he will have to roll back this idea of deployment of National Guards for domestic law enforcement, which is completely outside the purview of their function. That's one. And two, there seems to be also a dip in his popularity, a dip in his
Hmm.
style of politics, and in the fact that people no longer see what was promised actually taking place on the ground. I mean, and nothing happens in a vacuum. It's not in silos. People are evaluating the Trump administration on the basis of what they promised in terms of economy, what they promised in terms of security, and insecurity is multidimensional. And
Hmm.
what they have ultimately ended up achieving is through these multitudes and this confused network of tariffs. People are facing higher prices. There's increased cost of living, and given all of that, the pure rhetoric of immigration related crimes, or the fact that they need to crack down on some sort of security, seems to be very, very weak. And given that, I feel that President Trump or his administration also realizes that this that just labeling Democrat led states and calling them sanctuary cities and refusing cooperation is not going to work in their favor at
Hmm.
all. So I suppose all of these together are becoming factors for the president to state that even though he seems reluctant to accept the fact that they have pretty much lost that case, but he seems to accept the fact that the ruling went against what he would have wanted it to go, and the fact that he's rolling it back should be seen as him trying to in some way face reality and trying to recalibrate his whole rhetoric around economy or security, and then try and see if whatever next steps he takes or whatever would be the next political strategy should not directly be in conflict with what the states and the other state machineries and other institutions are functioning.
Hmm. Sure. Well, do stay on with me, Dr. Chadha, as we proceed. Let's also tell you that the US military says that 8 people were killed in new air and sea strikes that targeted suspected drug trafficking boats, raising the overall death toll in the campaign so far to at least 115. According to US Southern Command, the latest strikes were carried out over last 2 days in international waters. On Tuesday, 3 vessels traveling together were hit, with several occupants killed. The remaining boats were later destroyed after those on board entered the sea. Search and rescue procedures were activated, but the fate of all individuals remains unclear. Moreover, a second operation was performed yesterday, targeting 2 more vessels. Now, the US military has not disclosed the exact locations of any of the strikes. The similar operations have previously occurred in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. Since September, more than 30 such strikes have been conducted as part of Washington's alleged efforts to disrupt maritime drug smuggling routes to the US. However, the US military has not released public evidence linking the targeted boats directly to narcotics trafficking. Meanwhile, human rights organizations and international law experts have raised concerns, arguing that operations may constitute unlawful killings. They say that those targeted were civilians and did not appear to pose an immediate threat. And now I request Dr. Chadha to join me back in the discussions here. Dr. Chadha, now in fact we're also learning that US has now gone on to hit even the Chinese vessels in the area. Oil firms and tankers stepped up in the sanctions push. What do you think? Why is no international pressure really deterring Trump, and what needs to be done to stop this extrajudicial killings?
See, the US Southern Command, when they began these kinetic strikes, they were not operating purely on day-to-day information. This was part of a greater strategy on part of the administration, because they wanted to target, as they said, they wanted to target vessels operated by narco terrorists. And this is very important term to understand, because on one hand they seem to be combating against narco trafficking, and on the other hand they seem to have labeled certain of these groups as terrorists. And both of these in some way allow the US to then adopt a defense posturing against these vessels that are coming out of, or as they say, are either unlabeled, or they feel they are related to Venezuela somehow. And the idea is that US, when it takes up this defense posturing, they can then defend their country. So any of these kinetic actions that they are taking which would in under normal circumstances would not be allowed, are now all right to do on their part, because they are primarily defending their nation, or they're primarily defending US borders from entry of fentanyl or any of these precursors that are used for drug trafficking. So when you say that there is no outrage, I mean, there has been a lot of, I would say, maybe not immediate or military related outrage, but there has been a lot of skepticism with regard to what extent can US really take these actions, right? I mean, in just like pure IR sense, I think US can take certain actions with regard to restricting trade of certain goods, or making sure that it maintains its autonomy in terms of which country and which state and with which leader it wants to trade with. But the fact that this is being labeled as, let's say, crime against humanity or extrajudicial executions, those need to be examined in more detail. And as you mentioned, there isn't a lot of information that is coming out with regard to what has happened, or how many people have been affected as part of this. And the third aspect of it is the inclusion of other third countries between this US-Venezuela conflict. Once again, there is a lot of obscurity in terms of details, right? So we do know that US has clearly designated groups like Cartel de los Soles or Tren de Aragua as foreign terrorist organizations. And the administration is claiming that because it has labeled them as terrorists, they are beyond just pure criminals, which means US maintains the right to use military force. But again, it remains to be seen whether all these vessels that were not labeled, that do not have a flag, if they are operating in international waters, does US have the capability, I mean, the authority to do such operations or undertake these operations? Do they have enough information to make sure that these vessels were bound towards China, or which other states are involved. None of those informations, or none of those, none of that data is really out. That's the third part. And fourth, I mean, we need to look at how US has previously taken up this issue, because when we say that US wants to undertake these strikes as defensive, as part of their defense, they're arguing this on the basis of drug trafficking, right? Being some sort of a silent invasion into US territory.
Yeah.
Has US done is this the first time the US is engaging in that kind of defense posturing? No. So is US signatory to the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas? No. Does US recognize the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice? No. So given all of these factors, it remains to be seen how the international parties, specifically I'm talking about Latin America, how they can look at their region as a security area, as a free trade area, and whether or not they would want to retaliate, or they would want to respond to US unilaterally taking these actions. I mean, that remains to be seen. But again, I suppose most of these states are also calculating as to what would be in their best interest. And so far as we know, US does maintain a lot of presence and a lot of strategic hegemony in that area. So
Yeah.
it seems very unlikely that a lot of states will come out in favor of the Maduro government and try and defend Venezuela in this regard.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Chadha, for your perspective and sharing that with us. And with that, we're now going to proceed. Now, let's also tell you that Russian President Vladimir Putin has used his annual televised New Year's address to rally his troops fighting in Ukraine, and said that he believed in them and in victory in a war that he has framed as part of an existential struggle with the West. However, the US President Donald Trump is trying to broker an end to the nearly 4-year-old war, Europe's bloodiest conflagration since World War II, with both sides negotiating stances still far apart. Let's listen to what Russian President Vladimir Putin said.
Уважаемые граждане России, дорогие друзья, в эти минуты перед наступлением Нового года мы все ощущаем течение времени. Перед нами будущее. И каким оно будет, во многом зависит от нас. Мы рассчитываем на свои силы, на тех, кто рядом, кто нам близок и дорог, и всегда сами готовы подставить плечо. Такая взаимная поддержка дает нам уверенность в том, что все задуманное, наши надежды и планы обязательно...
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine wanted the war to end, but not at any cost, adding he would not sign a weak peace agreement that would only prolong the war. Let's hear him.
Мирна угода готова на 90%. Лишається 10%. І це значно більше, ніж просто цифри. Це 10%, у яких насправді все. Це про 10%, які визначатимуть долю миру, долю України і Європи. Те, як житимуть люди. 10% для збереження мільйонів життів. 10% рішучості, яка потрібна, аби мир запрацював на всі 100. 10% такої необхідної єдності і мудрості української, американської, європейської, всього світу. 10% до миру.
And moving ahead, New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani has announced more key appointments to his incoming administration. To lead New York City's public school system, Mamdani has named Kamar Samuels as school's chancellor. Samuels is currently a Manhattan superintendent and began his career more than 2 decades ago as an elementary school teacher in the Bronx. As Chancellor, Samuels will oversee more than 1,500 schools and a student population of over 900,000, making it the largest school district in the United States. Mamdani has also announced several senior city hall roles. Julia Curson will serve as deputy mayor for operations. Louis Yong has been named chief climate officer. and Emmy Liss will lead the Office of Child Care. The picks signal Mamdani's early priorities, education, climate policy and city services, as his administration prepares to take charge on January 1st.
We will pursue an aggressive democratization agenda to make sure the entire system has a voice. For one, our administration will improve the parent coordinator role to be a meaningful organizer of parents, rather than an administrative coordinator reporting to a principal. We want to restructure how meetings are run so that working parents can actually attend them. We cannot expect parents working 40, 50, 60, 70-hour weeks to then attend CEC meetings in person or even be plugged into when they are actually happening.
And joining me now in this discussion is Matthew Wadham. He's a journalist from Washington, D.C.
Hello.
Hi, Matthew, and a very happy new year to you. Matthew,
Happy New Year to you.
what do you think has triggered this change in course as far as Mamdani concerned on the mayoral control of the school systems?
Well, Zoran Mamdani, during his campaign, the campaign cycle, promised a hands-off approach to the city education, and then he abruptly reversed himself a few days ago and said that he was going to continue strong mayoral control over the city's public education system. So he has abandoned that promise, probably because he is a committed, socialist ideologue. And the thought of giving up that much power, the power to shape young minds, he actually sat down and thought about it, was not terribly appealing. And this is one of the reasons why he's going to appoint Kamar Samuels as the new chancellor of the New York City public school system, someone who shares many of Mamdani's ideas.
But do tell us more about Samuels and what credentials he has, and whether he will be able to deliver on the expectations.
Well, he has managed to accomplish a lot of his objectives in a lesser leadership role with the city's public schools department. He has merged schools, and he has placed diversity over educational achievement, because he thinks that diversity is one of the most important things that that has to be provided in a government-run educational system. He's managed to do the things that he set out to do in his lower level role within the city's public school system. So I imagine he's going to have a lot of support from the mayor's office, and he has a good chance of achieving what he wants to do as chancellor. One of the things that that he sees eye to eye with Mamdani on is they both want to get rid of the gifted program. That's for exceptional, intellectually gifted students, because Mamdani is opposed. Mamdani and Samuels are both opposed to that. They think that education should be completely equal, and if someone is intellectually brilliant, that they should not be given any special treatment. Their gifts should not be nurtured in any special way, which probably means that a lot of people who are parents of high achieving, high IQ students are going to withdraw their children from New York City public schools, because they're not going to get the attention that they need, because just like people, intellectually disabled students, low IQ students, high IQ students need special attention too, or it's more difficult for them to flourish in an educational system. So they're both, Mamdani and Samuels are both opposed to gifted education and want to dismantle that. And, that's the mayor, Mamdani made this clear during his run for the office of mayor, and it looks like he's going to live up to that promise.
All right. Thank you then, Matthew, for sharing that with us. And with that, viewers, let's move on. Now let's give you some news from Yemen, where separatists from Yemen's Southern Transitional Council have announced an agreement to deploy government forces in areas they recently took control of. The move involves the redeployment of the Homeland Shield forces across key regions in eastern and southern Yemen. The first units have already been deployed in the Thamud area. Further deployments are planned in the Ruma area and other locations. The areas covered by this agreement include parts of the Hadramaut and Al-Mahara governorates. The Southern Armed Forces say the deployment is being carried out under directives from their political leadership. The operation is also described as part of coordination with regional coalition partners. According to the STC, the aim is to maintain security and stability across the group. Says the deployment is intended to preserve safety and unity in Hadramaut, Al-Mahara and the wider south. Let's listen in to what the spokesperson for the STC said.
إنه انطلاقا من حرصنا على إنجاح جهود الأشقاء في التحالف وبما يحفظ المكتسبات المتحققة في تأمين كامل تراب وطننا الجنوب العزيز، فقد بدأت اليوم عملية إشراك زملائنا الجنوبيين في قوات درع الوطن الجنوبية للإطلاع بمسؤوليات والمهام الملقاة على عاتق قواتنا المسلحة جنبا إلى جنب مع إخوانهم من منتسبي كافة تشكيلات قواتنا المسلحة الجنوبية.
That's all we have time for, but thank you for watching NewsX World. For all international news and updates, stay tuned.